saying good evening and welcome to Let's Talk, Bridging the Divide, Louisville's Reckoning with Race. I'm Rachel Platt, the Director of Community Engagement here at the Fraser History Museum. Just to let you know, we began these series of conversations about 2 years ago, and I have to tell you, they don't get any easier, but they are needed if we are ever going to find common ground and move the needle forward when it comes to making any kind of progress. I was going to be sharing our moderating duties with the wonderful Renee Shaw from KET. She called about 15 to 20 minutes ago, had a last minute emergency, so she is not able to join us tonight, but we know how the TV business goes. Thank her for her effort, and we get it, that's for sure. So let's begin talking about race and how far we've really come in dealing with it. Now, the recent insurrection at the US Capitol and this picture of a man flying the Confederate flag had many questioning how much progress we've really made as a country. And has there ever been a reckoning? We're going to be talking about that tonight, not just as a nation, but as a state and as a city. Before we introduce our panel, I'd like to ask the audience to weigh in on a question. And that question is, how big of a problem is racism? We're going to put that question up on your screen, and you have the following answers you can choose from. So how big of a problem is racism? A big problem without much progress. B, things have gotten better, but there is still work to do. C, it's a minor issue. Major strides have been made. Or D, I don't see it as an issue. So we're going to let our audience weigh in. Our panelists aren't able to weigh in on this one, but I'll be asking you this question a little bit later. We'll give them just a couple of seconds to answer this, and then we'll show the results there. All right, we'll go ahead and bring up the results. How big of a problem is racism? 57% say a big problem without much progress. 42%, things have gotten better, but there's still work to do. 1%, a minor issue, major strides have been made, and 0% said they don't see it as an issue at all. So as we get this conversation started tonight, we preface this by saying the city of Louisville has declared racism a public health crisis. A review of LMPD has just been released pointing out significant challenges. The University of Louisville has announced plans to become a premier anti-racist metropolitan research university, and state lawmakers have suggested forming a bipartisan commission on race and access to opportunity. Some of these initiatives have come under fire as performative politics, not doing enough with investments, and too much talk and not enough action. We're going to be talking and asking about all of those things tonight. Now to our panelists, and we thank them all for joining us for this conversation. Louisville Mayor Greg Fisher, Dr. Neely Bendapudi, the president of the University of Louisville, Dr. Ricky Jones, graduate director and chair, Pan-African Studies Department at the University of Louisville. We also have State Senator Gerald Neal from District 33 among the lawmakers who co-sponsored that bipartisan commission. Lamont Collins also joining us. He is the president and CEO of Roots 101 African American Museum, our neighbor here on Main Street. And Keturah Heron, a policy strategist with the ACLU, a key catalyst with getting Breonna's Law passed in Louisville, outlawing no-knock warrants. Our community partners for tonight's conversation: Lean Into Louisville and 104.7 FM WLOU and 1240 AM WLLV. Ron Jones right there is the community relations manager with those stations. He's going to be our question facilitator later in the program. If you have questions, put them in the chat feature by Zoom, the comment section on Facebook. The sponsor of tonight's conversation, Fifth Third Bank, we thank them for their support. As we get started, we wanted to invite a special guest to set the stage for this conversation. Vita Morgan with the Courier-Journal. The newspaper recently had an 8-day series entitled Beyond Breonna. As it stated, no one could predict the tragedy of Breonna Taylor would spark this international conversation about systemic racism. Like the George Floyd case, it touched off protests about policing, but it went much deeper than that. It brought up questions about systemic racism all across the board and asked tough questions about whether we're willing as a country, a state, and a city to have that reckoning. So here to talk about the series for just about 3 to 4 minutes and what it covered and uncovered is Vita Morgan, the Director of Community Engagement, Diversity and Opinion with the Courier Journal. So Vita, we'll hand it over to you just to give us some brief remarks about this really important series that the CJ did.
Thank you, Rachel. I appreciate it. We started the Beyond Brianna project after spending months listening to racial justice protesters and other activists, and it was clear that their cries were about systemic racism that has plagued our city, our state, and our nation for generations. Any real lasting change would mean changing those systems. We were also hearing from readers who argued that there was no such thing as systemic or institutional racism. So we started on the project. We spent 3 months and we interviewed more than 60 people. We decided to focus on health, education, housing, criminal justice, employment. And we published a series over 8 days. And yet we knew that this was really just the beginning of our coverage. What we tried to show readers is the origin and the impact of systemic racism. We explained its deep roots and how these systems are interlinked. Wealth affects housing, which affects education, which affects job prospects, and so on. We showed where we are today because of these unfair systems, and we offered solutions. We learned that in many ways, Black residents are faring no better than in previous generations. Today in Louisville, 36% of Black households own their own home, while 70% of white households do. The average Black household income in 2019 was 59% of the average white household income, and nearly a quarter of the Black population lived in poverty compared with 11% of white residents. Black people are less likely to be ready for college, more likely to be suspended in school. They're also more likely to be searched by police during traffic stops, more likely to be unemployed, even when rates are adjusted for level of educational attainment. And statewide, Black people are almost 3 times as likely to be incarcerated as white people, and they are far more likely to be evicted from their homes. It was important for us to tell the story through people. So we told the story of health disparities through Alicia Beatty, who had suffered 6 miscarriages and felt doctors were unwilling to determine what prevented her from delivering. I was not taken seriously, she said. And it wasn't until her 7th miscarriage that doctors ran tests and discovered that she had a genetic blood disorder. After treatment, she was finally able to give birth, but her story helps tell of a healthcare system that has long given white patients better treatment. We told the story of education through Alexis Crook, who came from poverty and was often disengaged in school. Cook, who now has 3 master's degrees and a doctorate, only had 1 or 2 Black teachers before college. She never connected with the curriculum and had little support when she wanted to go to college. She said white students and classmates from wealthier backgrounds were pushed toward college while she and other who was evicted in March. What hurts me the most, she said, it's not me that I have to think about. It's my 4 kids. It's the way the world is already on my shoulders. I'm already living in government assistance. How much lower can a person feel, she said. Chris Smith's story illustrates problems with the criminal justice system. And as you probably know, we had to put an editor's note with this story because Chris was shot and killed December 11th. His story is powerful. He ran his own security company. He had started an initiative to help kids, but his struggles with the criminal justice system. Chris said at the time that he knew he had committed crimes and that he also didn't see many alternatives. I mostly blame the living conditions, poverty, he said. People think that the opposite of poverty is wealth. It's not, it's justice, he said. Justice, equality, all of that stuff goes out the window. And lastly, we shared the story of William Isaac to show how Black people are often locked out of job opportunities. He was born into poverty, joined the Army after turned to dealing drugs, which led to a criminal record, which then made it harder to find work. He completed a Kentuckiana Builds program, and he's now working for a construction company. We did this project not just to point out the problem, but to point to solutions. Kentuckiana Builds is one of them. Included with every story were potential solutions and information and organizations that people can partner with to root out racism. The solutions, many of them are there and have been included in various reports. The question is, and we raised it in our editorial, does Louisville have the will to change? Thank you.
Thank you, Vita, very much. And I know you were going to end up going out and rejoining as just a member of the audience. So we appreciate your voice in this because it certainly set the groundwork for this conversation. Mayor, let's begin with you. You have said there is a lot more that needs to be done. You've declared racism as a public health crisis. I guess one question we might have, are you sorry you didn't do that sooner or invested more resources perhaps throughout the tenure as being mayor? You're on mute, Mayor. Thank you, sir.
Okay, well, first, thanks for the panel, Rachel, everybody, co-hosts or co-panelists. Good to be with everybody. I am delighted to see the increased focus that, in particular, the white community is having on racism, and racism is a public health crisis. And you can get people sometimes give you a quizzical look and say, you know, why did you do that? This is one example as a mayor where some people say it's great, other people say it's terrible, other people say it's performative. What I'm trying to do is bring attention to an issue that's been with us for centuries and decades. But when you look at just the life expectancy gap between the average Black citizen and white citizen from low income to high income being 12 years, how can that not be a public health crisis? Or when you look at the daily trauma and mental health impacts of racism, how can that not be a public health crisis? Or you just saw some of the statistics that Vita showed there, home ownership half amongst the Black population versus the white population, and poverty rates as well. As I've been mayor now for 10 years, and our systems in this country are designed to produce the results that we get. And so the biggest challenge that we have, I think, is poverty. The minimum wage should be a living wage. The majority of the challenges that come through my office are because of poverty, whether it's housing, healthcare, education, law enforcement. And so whether it's poverty at the national level, the way that our school systems that are designed, the type of affordable housing that is not funded or prevalent throughout our city, these are all big issues. The money that we have at the local level is like baby money compared to where the big funds come from, which is the federal level and the state level. So we can always do more locally, and that's why we will continue to do what we're doing. But we need major system changes on these issues related to poverty, housing, education, healthcare, and you're really looking for a country that needs to look itself in the mirror and say, are we going to get it right this time? We did not get it right with the Kerner Commission in 1968. White America looked the other way. And at least I intend in my last 2 years in office to not look the other way, but to lean right into this and see what we can do here in Louisville.
Is there anything that you wish that you had invested more in, though, during the tenure of being mayor?
You know, yes, Rachel, we always wanted to do more, but compared to what? Like we started Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We started it, so increase. I'd love to have more in affordable housing. We helped start Evolve 502, which now has college scholarships for everybody that's in JCPS. I wish that could have happened sooner as well, but we've been on the front end of a lot of these issues. So yes, sure, I'd love to do more on each and every one of those, but I guess the point I'm trying to make is this is much bigger than the city of Louisville. We've got to solve our own problems, but with the tax base that we have, we're doing what we can do. We are pushing forward, but I would always love to do more. But the point is, we as a city have got to rally for systemic reform at the national level on these issues related to poverty if we expect to see true change at a local level. Because these statistics that Vita just went through and I've talked about, these are not just Louisville statistics. These are statistics of almost every city in the country. So this is not a problem that's unique to us, but it's a problem that needs to be solved.
Anybody want to weigh in right there before I ask the mayor another question and then go to our different panelists? Anybody want to weigh in right now? We all good? Okay. Then let me ask one other question of you, Mayor, before we go to some of the other panelists. As you've said, the Breonna Taylor case made Louisville certainly a focal point for America's reckoning on racial justice. As we know, there's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of hurt. How far along do you think the city is in the healing process?
Oh gosh, well, we're always going to have a long way to go because the challenges did not start with the Breonna Taylor tragedy. Again, we've got the challenges in Louisville are America's challenges. The challenges with police community legitimacy and police community trust, especially with the Black community, are at the very beginning of policing in America, and then they play out in each and every city, including our city here in Louisville as well. You can see, like LMPD does not get as much assistance from the community, Black community in particular, in helping to solve some of our violent crimes because there's a low level of trust between many of our Black citizens in LMPD. I wish there wasn't, but there is. Whether it's that or feeling of a disproportionate traffic stops, for instance, or use of force, all of those issues have to be addressed both with data. Some of them are real problems, some of them are perceived problems. You have to deal with those with facts, and then you have to deal with them with the training so that our officers know the appropriate practices to take place. But most important, and what I hope we're in a new era of, is co-producing public safety. If we have any segment of the community saying, well, it's the police's job for us to have a safe city and just leave it to them, we are never going to have the city as safe as we can be. We have to have our citizens saying we are co-producing public safety conditions with our police officers. We see our police officers as legitimate because they are policing in a way that we see as legitimate, whether it's Black Louisville or white Louisville, and we are working to produce these conditions together. So we've got significant ways to go before that's done. We have a new police chief that believes in this type of philosophy as well. And the Hillard Heinz report that we just completed has over 100 recommendations that lean right into this very essence of kind of the transition of where policing is going in America. And what I would like to see is for our city, with the fuel that has come out of Breonna Taylor's tragedy, to accelerate our ability to show what transformation looks like with policing. But it's going to be a lot of hard work for people to do things that they hadn't done before. And it's especially incumbent upon the police, my office, and white Louisville to understand why Black Louisville, why brown Louisville has reservations about this. And we've got to do everything we can to overcome those and build trust.
I want to get everybody to weigh in real quickly. Lamont, I'm going to go to you next. Talk to me a little bit about where you think we are in the healing process.
What did you say?
I'm wanting you to weigh in on where you think we are in the healing process.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I think the mayor hit on some key points, but just historical, to put it as factual, we know that racism was the foundation of America. I got 400-year change right here. We know law enforcement, and the reason that the Black community and the law enforcement community historically has had a problem started with slave patrols back in the South. So first we have to be realistic historically where we are now. Are we in a healing space now? I don't think so, because the same things are still continuing to happen on a daily basis. Are we at a point where we're listening? I believe, yes, Rachel, we're listening, but are we healing from the listening? I have not seen evidence that the healing has begun, but I think the conversation has begun. When the healing becomes a topic where those that are comfortable become uncomfortable in order to be comfortable, then we're in the healing process. And I'm not so sure we're in that process where the comfortable are willing to be uncomfortable to get there.
Dr. Bendapudi?
I would say that as somebody who's been in Louisville for 2.5 years, I cannot speak to the history. And as Mr. Collins just said, I am learning so much about the history of policing in the South. It's truly been an eye-opener to see. I too agree with him that I think we are beginning the conversations, and I'm very hopeful that these conversations will lead to healing. But Rachel, I can speak more about the university community broader. I would like to think we're on the process, but I don't think we can say we're done, we're healed, we move on.
And I'm going to circle back to you to get more from the University of Louisville. Before we do that, the healing process, Dr. Jones, and then Couture, and then I've got a question for Senator Neal.
No, we haven't gotten to the healing process yet. I think we're moving along a continuum. Sometimes when people have conversations about these things, they dichotomize them like it's a zero-sum game. You know, we're either where we were or we're exactly where we want to be. And then that conversation goes off the rails rather quickly. We're moving along a continuum in the country. We're not where we were, but we're not where we want to be. And I think we're a long way from where we want to be. And I think what's going on, and it's apropos that we're having this conversation during Black History Month, because I don't think Americans really have a very good understanding of history. We live in an ADD society. So, you know, we'll take time to have rather, you know, shallow television programs or truncated social media posts, and all of that stuff really doesn't get us very far. But we can look to South Africa, I think, at the end of apartheid, where they had truth and reconciliation commissions, right? And it's very important that we talk about both of those, truth and reconciliation. And so, as Brother Collins said, slavery, racism really sat, and white supremacy sat at the heart of America even before its founding. As we walk through the things that Black people have been through, you know, from the Stonewall Rebellion to the New York insurrection, to David Walker, to Denmark Vesey, to Gabriel Prosser, to Nat Turner, Dred Scott, V. Sanford, on up. We see this constant struggle for white people to humanize themselves and to force America to treat them humanely along with everybody else. We've been the people who sat at the vanguard of really believing in and walking the walk of mastering America's ideals, what America says she believes in. Nobody more than Black people, and certainly Native people, have believed in freedom, truth, justice, and equality more than Black folk. And we've had to fight for it every step along the way. So until we can deal with the historical truth of what America has been and still is, we won't be able to have reconciliation. So I think the 2021 is going to tell us a lot. I think this is the year of walking it. You know, 2020, there was a lot of talk about we hear you, we see you, all of this stuff. There was a lot of talk. But as my homeboys, the Migos, said, now we got to walk it like we talk it. And so I think 2021 will tell us a lot.
I'm seeing people saying truth with what you're saying there from comments from our audience. A lot of people are saying it's one thing to talk, we need some action. So Keturah, the healing process, too soon to talk about that until we see action? Where are you in this?
I mean, I absolutely think that we need to talk about it, but we're nowhere close to being healing. Just like Dr. Jones said, there's a lot of truths that need to be spoken about. I think that we as a city have some things that we can do immediately now to show that we are being serious about the healing. For example, Lamont Collins, he's got the African American Museum here in Louisville, Roots 101, and they're not financially sound right now. And so if we're really serious as a city about healing, we need to make sure that we're resourcing some of these initiatives that has been shown by our Black brothers and sisters within the city. But I do think that we have a long way to go, and it starts with the truth telling, and then also truth telling about the history of slavery in Louisville, the history of slavery in Kentucky. I've always said that Kentucky is as a place of polite racism. I grew up in Madison County in Richmond, Kentucky, and moved here to Louisville when I was 19. And I just feel like that the things that I've experienced is that racism does exist, and it always has existed, but it's very polite.
Senator Neal, let's talk to you real quickly. We had talked about you're one of the co-sponsors of the Bipartisan Commission on Race and Access to Opportunity. Some colleagues have said, enough commissions, we need action. Do you understand what they're saying? Do you agree with it at all? I'm assuming not, because you're a co-sponsor of that commission.
Well, no, I think that, I'm a policymaker, and that means that we have to put constructs together that are directed toward resolution of various types of problems. But I think what we have here in terms of that commission, actually in the Senate version is Senate Bill 10. And the reason why I reacted and joined in with that particular piece is because it is pretty unique to where the space that I operate in. What's happening there with that bill, from my perspective, is that the Senate, if that bill passes, then the Senate has taken not only ownership of that issue, but also they have put themselves in the position, setting up the structure by which information can flow into our policy-making processes to deal specifically with issues in a very intelligent way. If we don't do that, and the way we're structured now and how we do our work, it's very, very difficult, first of all, to navigate anything through the democratic process, the legislative process, but it's even more difficult unless you have a mechanism in there that's prioritized, it's recognized by the leadership, and it's calculated to get that information front and center into the processes where it can become reality. So I see it as an opportunity. It's just a mechanism. The question is going to be, people talk about action and they talk about commissions and all these things. Well, you know, actions require structures to act toward and against, you know, but our history has been that we've gotten poor results. You can go back in our history and what you will see is that we've had spurts of hope associated with some quote unquote progressive activity to overcome racist practices and so forth. But what happens immediately after that? You get the pushback, you get the structural pushback to maintain the status quo or to compromise those movements forward. That's what we're going to experience now. I agree with the speakers so far. We're in a situation now where, yes, there's discussions that are taking place. There's always been discussions at various stages of the game. There's always been actors and players and good things have happened. I agree with Dr. Jones when he talks about, yeah, we've done some good things. We're not where we need to be now, but it's a dynamic process. And it's not something that's just, you just walk down the street and because you identify something. If you want me to really frame this question and go back to the Senate Bill 10 piece, it's this. People have a tendency, when I say people, I'm talking about the majority of society, have a tendency to think of this as a Black problem. But really and truly, this is a white problem. And it's going to take the white community to make all kinds of leaps and bounds in terms of understanding the history, their relationship to it, those things, their vested interest in in making things better, because there are benefits to those who want to make a society more sane, whole, just, and equitable. So I think Senate Bill 10 is just one little step at a moment in time with some individuals that started a discussion that grew out of a protest. That's the result of what happened to Breonna Taylor and many more, and it continues to happen. So no, I don't think it should be dismissed. I think folks ought to get behind that. They ought to support that, and they ought to make it honest. And I invite that involvement.
All right, let me move on to Dr. Bendapudi, because we want to talk about the fact that U of L has announced plans to become a premier anti-racist metropolitan research university. First of all, what does that mean exactly? And what steps are already in the works to accomplish that?
One of the reasons that I put that out as a bold statement is that the General Assembly gave us the mission of being a premier metropolitan research university. And that's a big goal. And nobody bats an eye at that. You know, we think that we will do that. And to me, we've got to be an anti-racist metropolitan research university. In some ways, to me, it's redundant because every university ought to be anti-racist. Just give me 1 minute to explain why, Rachel. There's many things that racism is. We all know that. But one of the things that signifies racism is deep intellectual laziness, right? You don't want to really think about a problem. You want to judge somebody by a very superficial trait. So to me, every university ought to be an anti-racist university. But after this summer, my passion about anti-racism actually predates this summer. I want people to know. From 1999 on, I've been talking about this and really been working towards it. But we signed the anti-racism pledge as a university about a year and a half ago. I did that as the CEO of our university, as the president, when CEO Action began. This is a group of businesses. We're talking about Procter & Gamble and Accenture. And if they all banded together and said racism is a real problem, we've got to do something within our communities. Shame on us as universities to be lagging behind. You would think we would be at the forefront pushing this forward. So to me, I want people to say, you said you'd be anti-racist. What have you done? What are you doing? It's easier not to claim that. But I think unless we put it out there, we will not be pushing ourselves until we measure, right? We won't manage that. So that's why we're calling it that. And to me, anti-racism is a simple idea at its core, but clearly it's something that for centuries we've not been able to get through, that there's no inherent inferiority or superiority because of the color of your skin. And so to me, There's a lot that we need to do to be truly anti-racist. It's an aspiration. I'm not saying we're there here today, but I'm also saying if we don't say we will get there, we will never, if it's not a topic. I talk about it at every meeting, and it's something that's really important to me.
Can you give us one example of something the university has done? Give us an action item when you say that. People in the audience are saying, give me an example that I understand.
Glad to do that. Well, it's fine. I usually don't talk about it publicly, but I'm happy to do that. Talk is cheap, okay? Nobody is going to come up here and say, I'm actually racist. I actually think this is a good thing. Or even, so all of us, I also truly believe, want to do the right thing, that the vast majority want to. But to me, it's your actions that speak louder than words. And it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and say it. My senior cabinet, it's my top people that I meet with every week. And at an ACC level, university, I will tell you that about 40% of the people who report to me are Black. And about half of them are women. And to me, they're outstanding. I'm worried about they're listening to this and thinking, they're much more. It's not the color of their skin, but you've got to be intentional. The tone needs to be set at the top. Let me talk about something else at the university. The anti-racism agenda we have set. It's not going to be done in a day, but we are looking at all of our policies, administrators, faculty, staff, students to say, what are we going to do to bridge the gaps? And one last thing, and then I'll be quiet. If we really have to reduce the racial gap, we've got to invest in it. So I've put it out in my strategic plan. This, in 1 year, we more than doubled the money that we are putting aside for financial aid, for need-based aid, because that is a very big concern. I could go on, but I'll just stop there.
Well, no, we wanted a couple of examples. So Dr. Jones, let me ask you this. You wrote an op-ed on the announcement of this, saying only a mad woman would proclaim she's committed to making her school the nation's premier anti-racist university in the middle of a society plagued by racism. Tell us a little bit more about that, when you first heard it and what you think of it now.
Well, first of all, I hope that people won't just take that quote out of context and think that was the gist of the article, because it was not. The overall gist was she's insane, and I love it.
Exactly.
Because
you love it.
I think it's a push. First of all, let me say this, and President Bendapudi is quite often very humble about some of these things, but the first thing is that she did it, right? And so folks can say, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. Talk is cheap. But she did that talk. She made that proclamation. She made that commitment. And many other presidents at predominantly white universities have not done that. To me, that means something. Now, obviously, I work closely with her. I'm one of her faculty members. I'm the chair of one of the oldest Black Studies departments in the country. The discipline of Black Studies is only 5 years older than the Pan-African Studies department at the University of Louisville. We have the first PhD in the South. I've talked to Dr. Bendapudi about re-strengthening our faculty, something that we'll do over the next 3 to 5 years. I trust her, so I don't need anything in writing because I trust her, and we're already on the road to doing that right now. I'll say this publicly. I talked to her about a situation with the faculty member last week, talked to her one day, and a call was being made to me the next about a faculty member try to get things done, in Pan-African Studies as well as JCPS. We're working right now, when you talk about things to get done, we're in the works with JCPS to try to expand the University of Louisville's footprint to teach Black studies at the high school level and give students college credit for that. A lot of resources are being put into that. That's big, because by the time students get to us at the University of Louisville, we've lost so many already. So we're trying to expand that and see how much we can do. I'll say this, the city of Louisville, the mayor's office, everybody in the city should understand this. No great city is a great city without a great university. So I think the investment in the University of Louisville and the attention paid to the University of Louisville is paramount for the future of the city of Louisville for 3 major reasons when you talk about anti-racism. One, there is an intellectual and educational imperative to this, right? We cannot continue to function with people not understanding the true history of this country and this city as we move forward. Education is key. It opens doors for students. You move beyond the high school level, through the college level, through master's degrees, PhDs, MDs, JDs. All of those levels open doors, and we need people who are sensitive to diverse populations as they move through that pipeline. Two, there is a moral imperative to this. We are trying, I think, at the University of Louisville to do what is right simply because it is the right thing to do. Please don't think that Dr. Bendapudi has not received pushback from people in this community, from the political arena, the business arena, and beyond, simply because she said, I am trying to make this an anti-racist university. And don't get caught up on that term, because that movement has been around since this country's been founded. It's been called different things, but it's always been around. We've yet to have a president to make that proclamation, and it says something about the forces arrayed against that movement that people will be upset simply because she made it. Okay, so simply because she made it and people are pushing against her, I like a good fight. I'm going to stand with her on that. Also, there's a pragmatic thing here, Rachel. We now live in the most multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multicultural America that we have ever seen. When you look at birth rates in this country and the demography of people being born, we're going to be seeing more people of color come through the educational systems all over this country. They are going to be in businesses all over this country. The University of Louisville cannot afford to continue to send people out into the workforce in this city, in this state, in the country, or internationally who do not have a good grasp on race and diversity. We simply can't do it. They're not going to be successful. So all of those things are things we're talking about and thinking about. I don't want to put words in the president's mouth, but I think we agree on this. So when people have asked me about this, and some folk get impatient, this is a super tanker. It's not a speedboat. And they say, well, are you supportive of the president? What's being done? We have to take time to be patient, to be strong, to be strategic, and also committed and realistic, and understanding that we're not going to get this done tomorrow, but work our fingers to the bone to do everything we can to get as far as we can in the time that we have here. So I think she's committed to that. I'm committed to that. So those are some hardcore things that are going on, and we can do more. We don't have all the answers yet, but we're pretty smart. So I think we'll work together.
Let me ask you one question, Dr. Bendapudi, then I'm going to ask a question of all the panelists. Dr. Jones mentioned pushback. A, how much pushback have you gotten? And when you get it, what do you say to people? What's your response?
Obviously, with anything that you propose, there will be pushback. And I have tried to engage with any time there's been a pushback to explain that to me, the two things I talk about are all we're saying is it's all about equity. Give everybody an opportunity to succeed. If we say that's really about the American dream, well, some people are being left out of that. Let's really even the playing field, give people a chance to succeed. The other thing I talk about is what you heard from Dr. Jones. And I strongly believe that. I try to tell them that increasingly, if your young students, whatever color they are, and certainly I'm talking to my Caucasian kids here, when they graduate, they are actually better off if they're in a university that says they're anti-racist and really works towards it and creates a diverse opportunity for them. So trying to tie it to it's the right thing to do. And even if you're purely selfish for yourself, you are better off being in an environment where you're exposed to many different ideas and you can talk about, I can work with people of very many different backgrounds.
Let's talk about the question that we asked the audience at the beginning. How big of a problem is racism? Let's talk specifically here in Louisville. Then we can go country if we want. Mayor, let's start with you. How big of a problem do you think racism is in our city?
It's an extraordinarily significant problem. Look, when you think, the dream is everybody's born into a world where it's an open playing field in front of everybody. And just the reality in America and in Louisville, that is not the case. And, we can go back again to the statistics earlier in the show. The numbers do not lie. Okay, where do those numbers come from? They come from the systems that are in place. Again, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's income, these systems are what need to be dismantled in order to produce a equal or equitable playing field. So it's a very significant problem in our city and others. And most of government is, when you talk about where the resources are trying to change this, but they're not nearly enough. So it's a moral problem. This is what Neely was talking about. The fact that just because of the color of someone's skin that they're going to have a different life outcome, that is immoral. Some people come into this argument through that lens and say, okay, it's not right. If you don't believe that, it's an economic argument. Okay, Dr. Jones talked about demography. Demographics are destiny. We are going to be a majority non-white country in about 20, 25 years. Wouldn't it be smart for the majority population of Caucasians to be preparing a workforce for that, for their kids to understand what it means to operate in a multicultural society, for their customers, the GDP of America is 75, 80% retail, to be in good shape financially just to buy their stuff. So if they don't think it's right morally, they can go from their own self-interest, as Neely pointed out as well. And the third port of entry is safety. You can see what happens when a capitalist system gets out of balance with income and wealth. We are out of balance in America right now, most out of balance since the Great Depression in the 30s. And when too few people have too little, they're not going to put up with it anymore. And that was one of the factors, I believe, behind some of the demonstrations last summer. Not the sole factor, but one of the factors. So however you enter this argument, it should have your attention. This is a white America issue predominantly to address because of who's created this type of system. So it's moral, it's economic, and it's public safety.
Lamont, let's talk to you. How big of a problem is racism in the city of Louisville?
Well, we know statistically we're the fifth most segregated city in the country. So we know historically how Louisville has separated what our city's about. How big racism is, in my opinion, is just like the flowing of blood through a vein. Louisville historically has, well, Kentucky historically has always been that way. Race has always been an issue. It's an issue that we always have to address. Breonna Taylor incident tragedy brought it to a forefront, but we've dealt with it since the time I've been in Louisville all my life, went to University of Louisville, was a Pan-African department as a minor, won the first Jerry Stranger Award in communications there. And University of Louisville at that time was an open enrollment. The mission was called Urban Mission University. So I saw Louisville at its best when it was growing in the 80s, okay? I see what Louisville is now. And I see under the leadership of the Madam Doctor, what she's doing and what she's committed to. But to say, or even try to acknowledge racism is any different in Louisville than it was when I was a child, I couldn't do that because the same issues that I see today, I saw in 1960. The same people, here's the saddest part about what's going on here. We see the same people at the table for the last 40 years because people are comfortable with the people at the table. If you are comfortable with people at the table, everybody's eating the same meal, feeling good. We got to get people different at the table to deal with racism because I may not let you serve me the same meal you serve these other people for 40 years. And that's the problem here in Louisville is that we're allowing the same people to be at the table. So how can we move to a healing process or a different Louisville if the same people have been at the table for 40 years and nothing's changed?
So how do we change that? Katura.
Well, I think, you asking me that?
Well, let's ask you then. I'll have Katura weigh in and Dr. Jones as well.
Well, I think, well, my thing to change it is to change the people around you. I don't think leadership should be, a leader is not a leader that has to be around people that make them comfortable. And I keep saying that, but it's factual. I'm sure the mayor is not around people that always make him comfortable. Ricky's not, the doctor's not, I know Gerald Neal's not, I know Ms. Herron's not. So we have to be willing to work in uncomfortable situations to relieve things that are around us. And that's one thing when you go to the South, to the North. When I used to go to New York in the summertime, the coolest thing about New York is people were uncomfortable, but they learned to be uncomfortable to get along with each other. Whether it was Italian community, Jewish community, it didn't matter. They learned to operate and be with others. And that's where I see our biggest struggle is getting out of our comfort zone so everyone can be comfortable together.
Katura, you weigh in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Lamont. I think that we have to be intentional about bringing other folks at the table. Historically, I think in all communities, you have the certain Black folks who get a say-so and talk about what needs to happen and change. But you have folks here on the ground in Louisville who stepped up in the wake of COVID-19 and Breonna Taylor. You have the organization Change Today, Change Tomorrow, who have taken it upon themselves to feed the West End for months, to clothe the West End for months. And so I think that we just have to get really be intentional about reimagining what community is. And I think that what white supremacy has told us is that you have to look a certain way, or you have to have a certain level of education, or somebody has to know you to bring you in. And those aren't the people who are really changing the communities. And so I think what we have to do is really get into the community and allow the people who have been taking care of the community, give them those resources to expand their work and really make the change that needs to happen, and that is impactful. And so I think that we just have to, as Lamont said, be comfortable being uncomfortable. But it's almost like we're living in we have to live in a science fiction world. Like the world and what is going to take the community that we want is something that none of us has ever seen before. And so we have to be okay with really intentionally reimagining, like, what is this? What does this mean? And I'm not someone who is big on like watching sci-fi movies, but that's what I related to, is that what it is that we want, nobody has ever seen it. So sometimes someone may ask you something like, I don't know what it is, but this is not it. And so I think that we also have to be intentional with bringing young people to the table and allow them to come up with the solutions, because really they are our next taxpayers, our next presidents of universities. And they're the ones that we're really creating a better Louisville for.
And Dr. Jones, you weigh in, and then I've got another question that we'll start with Senator Neal on that one.
And let me try to be quick. Let me say to Keturah, you know, as she knows, because Keturah and I have a relationship, we are on a text thread with you know, her sister and Philip Bailey and a number of other people. If those texts ever are made public, they would probably run us out of the city. So, you know, that's my sister on another. But I am a big sci-fi fan. And what sci-fi does, it gives you the ability to imagine different worlds. But a couple of points when you talk about racism and, you know, what needs to be done to help to change it, especially from the Black side. One, you can't understand America without understanding racism. And you can't understand racism without understanding white supremacy and what the underpinnings of white supremacy are. And that conversation makes people somewhat uncomfortable sometimes, but we have to have a more mature understanding of what white supremacy is. Quite often people want to see white supremacy in cartoonish terms, you know, of people running around nocturnally in hoods and burning crosses on Black people's yards, or running through, you know, the nation's capital with the Confederate flag, and that's what they see as white supremacy, or the Proud Boys, you know, chanting "Jews will not replace us" in Charlottesville. You know, these very stark representations of hatred. But that's really not a very mature and effective understanding of what white supremacy is. I see white supremacy as this. It is the idea that one race, right, monochromatically has the right to think, know, and decide. To think, know, and decide in every space. So when you move into these spaces, who are the people who have the right to green light projects? The people who have the right to green light curriculum changes at a university. So when Dr. Bendapudi talks about having you know, an administrative staff, executive staff that is high-ranking Black folk, right? High-ranking women, that's very important, not just for us, because look, we understand this. She won't say this, I will. Universities are usually about 5 to 10, maybe 15 years ahead of the communities in which they sit. They're usually more progressive spaces, right? And we're trying to pull cities along or help cities move along in whatever way we can. But we see these things reflected at universities as well. Here's the last point, and Keturah touched on this, Brother Collins touched on this. And I see this as being particularly pronounced in Louisville in the 24, 25 years that I've been here. There has been an extreme comfort with a certain type of Black people. And it's not even really based just on their education either, Keturah, or, you know, their professional achievement. It's people who are more passive, who are more go along to get along. They'll be at the table, but they're really not bringing anything different. And my idea is, you know, folks quite often say, well, you know, you got to be at the table. It doesn't matter if you're at the table, if you're saying the same thing that everybody else at the table has been saying for the past 50 years. So I think folk have to get more comfortable with Black people who are going to challenge them, right? Not just to blow up a space, but people who have different ideas, different views, who are confident enough to say, look, this is wrong. And if you go down this road, things are going to blow up in your face. That's very, very important. Until Louisville gets there, whether it's the University of Louisville, the mayor's office, businesses throughout the community, then we're going to have problems. Because if you don't do that, white supremacy is not static, right? It's fluid. It changes its face in every generation. So the Klan would morph into the White Citizens Council. The White Citizens Council would morph into the Republican Party. So all of these things quite often morph, but they're still there. And if we don't understand that and we're not comfortable with that, then we'll continue to spin our wheels.
So let's start reimagining with that question. It kind of sets me up for where I was going to go with Senator Neal on that. Let's talk about reckoning, what that looks like. Some have said reparations. The Courier laid out many action items that can happen in a community. So I want to start with you, and then I'm going to go to each panelist. Let's reimagine. If you could implement what one thing, be it in the city or the state, that you think would make a significant difference automatically, what would that be? Senator Neal, let's start with you.
I don't think there's one thing. I think this thing is multiphasic, it's multifaceted, it's definitely structural, and it does reinvent itself. I think it does. I like the words that Couture was using, intentional. It's going to take some real intentional thinking and actions by those who are in position to do so, and the reorganization of how they direct their resources to make those changes in a sustained way. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is it's going to take massive investment in every aspect of the Black community, whether it's in the educational arena. I'm glad to hear this from Dr. Benaputi as it relates to U of L. I think Ricky Jones has certainly framed it, but the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of institutions that are still part of that structural makeup that have to re-examine what their role is and how they're going to rearrange their relationships in order to focus intentionally on this piece. I think the other part of it is, you're talking about being at the table. There's a lot of tables you can be at, but if you're voice shy, or you passive, as been indicated, or if you're not knowledgeable, or you are dominated by those who have some other outcome they want to come, you're not going to make a good, a real significant change in that situation, by and large. The question is, how do you empower people? See, people have to be empowered. So the strategies that we use have to be calculated to empower the very people that we're thinking that we're trying to help. I was in a meeting today, a committee meeting today, and someone challenged a bill that I was co-sponsoring just on the basis that we wanted to get inclusion of people to the boards, of screening committees, more African Americans are, they use the words minority, which is another discussion, by the way. But my point is that they want, this was a challenge. Why do we need this? We got to change the hearts. I don't give a damn about somebody's heart. What I'm giving them is about how people with resources are intentional about empowering people and rearranging their relationships and raising that to a level of priority to make change. If not, then what we'll do, we will have spurts of progress. That's why I love the protest, because it stirred the pot. It is stirring the pot. That's a great dynamic that's taking place. But the question is, how fast are we going to move forward? Are we going to change that structural relationship? Are we going to be intentional about our application of it? What is the government going to do in conjunction with the private folks that have always been satisfying their piece, and governments which are primarily disinvested or did not invest sufficiently, let's say, in the African American community? And lastly, I think it's very important to understand, and the comment was made, and I keep making this over, this is a white problem. Let's get straight about this. This is not a Black problem. What you see is the results that's taking place, the negative results, if you want to put it in that context, in the Black community. It's not something that runs out every day. Somebody runs out every day and say, hey, I want to bring hell on my head. That's not what's going on. This is a context that's created structurally, that's historically rooted, that is imbalanced. The disparities and the lack of opportunity through generations are manifesting themselves not only in Louisville, but all across this country, in fact, around the world. So the question is, if we face that and we answer those questions and we rearrange our relationships, those with the where we're falling and capacities to make change, and we prioritize those things with strategies that empower individuals, that empower communities, that empower, relationships, then we're going to see change, and we're going to see significant change. And I think irreversible change for the better.
Everybody raise your hand if you agree with Senator Neal that this is a white problem.
Well,
Okay, wait, well, Katura and Ricky did not raise your hand, so I want them to weigh in on.
Take my hand down too.
I'm taking
Take mine
your hand
down.
I'm not
Okay.
sure.
Take mine
Okay,
down.
well, who doesn't think it's a white problem and would like to react to that? Because Dr. Jones, you didn't raise your hand. So why don't you say this is a white problem like Senator Neal does?
No, I don't completely disagree with him. I simply think it's incomplete. I think the roots of it are in whiteness. The roots of the problem is with white people and white supremacy in the country. But at this moment, that has bled all over everybody. So there's so many significant, intellectual, identity, performative, cultural problems in Black America as a result of living in this cauldron that I can say the roots of it are in whiteness, but it is a problem that is so deeply embedded now that it's bled all over all of us.
So
Great.
based on this with the imbalance, empowerment, and the things that Senator Neal said, and everything, how deep rooted it is there anybody who says, if one thing could happen to reimagine, I wish it would be this?
Well,
Dr.
I
Jones.
think, oh, go ahead.
Very quickly, I'm an educator at heart, outside of everything else that I do. If there was one thing that I would do for the next 50 years, I would have every Black student in the Commonwealth be able to attend college for free. I think that would increase that intellectual educational base. It would increase the professional base, because the majority of students that we lose at our university and others, we lose them because of financial hardship. So for me, for just 50 years, we would see every Black student be able to attend college for free. I would love to see that nationally, but we could do it here in the Commonwealth.
And I'd like to one up Ricky on that or so. I think we need to start with publicly supported childcare, universal pre-K, going all the way through a publicly supported post-secondary degree, so that we have a different structure from birth all the way through the acquisition of this education. Before that, the immediate thing that could be done with several strokes of the pen would be to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. That's being discussed in DC, and I think we got a real chance to get that done in the next 2 years. And then, so living wage, then the publicly supported child care to education continuum. Then I think the last thing, and I've led this effort as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, is to deal with this issue of reparations, to put money back into the Black community that was more than well-deserved, so that dreams toward entrepreneurship, home ownership, to address the wealth gap can be addressed. That really shakes white folks up, okay? But you've got to start talking about it more to culturalize this conversation. And I think those three things could make fundamentally huge differences in the country and have all kinds of side effects as well.
Who else wants to weigh in, Lamont or Katura?
Yeah, I like to say something that, first of all, when they're saying that when America catches a cold, white America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. So in saying that, when we talk about re-education, or Senator Neal mentioned that it was a white problem, and I think Dr. Jones was saying it's a Black problem because of what's going on in America, right? So we're dealing.
No. Let me stop you, bro. I didn't say it's a Black problem. It is absolutely not a Black problem.
Well, I didn't mean to say problem, but you're saying we're initiating what's happening. So what I'm saying is that if it's a re-education of white America, it's got to be an education of Black America in the same time. So what I'm saying is that we have to continue to attack the issue to get where we need to go. And one thing is, as the mayor said, reparations. Well, we just take a city budget and look at a city budget and how money is dispersed in a city budget. That can determine a lot of success what will happen in our Black community. If money is going, what money goes to? Is money going to education where kids can look in the mirror and know their education is more important, whether they're running on a track or whether they're playing football? But where does education go in this city, and how much education is important to young people in this community? So just looking at our budget here in Louisville and taking those dollars that are here, not using the word reparations, but just taking the dollars that are here and putting them where we can be more successful for people all across the board, especially young people of color.
Mayor, do you want to respond to that? I mean, do we feel like the budget has addressed those things that we're reimagining?
Well, on the education in particular, JCPS is an independent organization. Its budget is twice the size of the city budget. It's got its own separate board. It's got its own challenges as well. So the city doesn't put a lot, puts a low millions of dollars into education because that's not the primary responsibility of the city budget. What we have done is really help to start and scale up what's called the Evolve 502, which is designed to provide out of school time resources for families that don't have the advantages of families with means. So tutoring, mentoring, trips, mental health supports, and then the availability of a post-secondary degree. So we just announced this about 2 months ago. Every JCPS freshman through senior now has a free 2-year degree when they graduate from JCPS, and if they're Pell eligible, 4 years by going to U of L or Simmons College. So those are things we can use our influence to make happen in the community. But in terms of true education reform and how those monies are spent, what I just described with Evolve 502, it's my opinion, the federal education system that flows down to states should have all of those components in it, as well as universal pre-K and all these different supports and post-secondary degrees. So we do what we can with our budget, but the big money is at the state and federal level with education.
Rachel, can I jump in for just a second on
Real
this?
fast.
On
Go
higher
ahead.
ed, over the Louisville and especially the state of Kentucky talk a lot about education, but we don't see a real commitment to it.
Yep.
Over the last decade on the state level, our university has been, they've divested over $200 million or so in us. So that is an incredible amount of money. We're consistently asked to make bricks without straw. So the state has to be clear and the city has to be clear and committed on whether or not they're really committed to education, because the numbers have not bared it out. And we've worked really, really hard to continue to deliver a quality product without that commitment. And so parents need to be aware of that, because that's what their children are living with.
So Rachel, can I make a point real quick?
Yeah, you go real fast and then we'll get to Couture.
Okay, and I want just real quick. No, I'll defer to Couture. Go ahead. I'll
All right,
make my point later.
All right.
Well,
I appreciate it. I just want to say that Dr. Jones is correct about education. I am someone who did not like to engage in school. One of the reasons was being in school specifically about hearing about history. There was no Black history in growing up in elementary, middle, or high school. And so when it came to history classes or civic classes, I was so disengaged. I was like, why do I even have to hear about this? Also, when we did talk about Black history, it was also always hearing about Black folks in this oppression, not in an uplifting way. And so I just want to say that I do agree with that. But I want to give people 3 statistics. Kentucky is #1 in child abuse. Kentucky is #2 in the number of young kids who've had a mother or a father incarcerated. Kentucky is #3 in women incarcerated. And so what I think that we have to do is intentionally defund the police and invest in communities. We have to reimagine what public safety is, and we have to make sure that we're taking care of our people in the community. We cannot criminalize or incarcerate our way out of issues that we have seen that is embedded in white supremacy and that is embedded in racism.
Who wants to react to that? Senator Neal?
Well, I wanted to get back to my issue. I think they're all tied together, though. And the reason why I want to get back to is what Ricky Jones just said, the education piece, the argument that education is the highway to success into the future and all that sort of thing. Yet the funding is inadequate in terms of that objectives that the changes that we're talking about. And we know that that's key to this process, but yet the funding and the type of decisions making on the level that I operate on in the state do not really grab that and really invest on the level that we think it should. Now, we all recognize that resources are finite, so you can't put them everywhere. We know that. But understand, there's only 2 African Americans in the Senate. There's 38 individuals making decisions. There are only 5 African Americans and a lady of Eastern Indian descent in the House of 100 people. And when you make decisions, and this component that we're talking about here is raised as an issue as to why they should make additional investments, et cetera, it gets lost in the discussion. It gets pushed to the side. It's not central to any particular outcome that's intentional or something that we can come up with a result. That's why I like Senate Bill 10, because it puts it front and center. So when I say that this is a white problem, I'm not talking about there's not people that are white, that are goodwill, that want to do good things and have been historically and so forth. What I'm saying is they're in control of this system. And if they do not have sensitivity to this issue, and if they're not intentional about the outcomes, then we're going to see a slow walk forward and maybe 2 walks back. And that's what we've been experiencing historically, despite our efforts, the brilliance and the stand up, the strength, the survival instincts, and every intellectual vein or wrinkle in our brains to what? Move forward as a people, African Americans. Oh no, we have a triumphant history against tremendous odds. I make no exception to that. But I am saying we are operating in a structural context of individuals that do not raise to priority the subject matter that we're talking about here sufficiently to make large and very incisive and deep changes to divert or at least change the trajectory of the history that we've already suffered. That's what I mean by that. And I don't think anything can refute that historically, factually, in any other way.
All right,
Well,
Dr. Jones, let's.
the irony real quick on that is poor rural Kentucky would benefit from all of this, Senator.
And that's what I was saying about tying these things. A wino once told me when I was a young man, when I was trying to do something idealistic, he said, Neil, you're not going to get anywhere with that until you can show somebody what they're going to get out of it. And I think that's what has to happen. They need to, a realization has to come that this is a win-win proposition. Sometimes in the short run, but certainly in the long run, and it should be raised to another level of priority. It's a hard push to get folks that I deal with in the context that I deal with to that level of focus and intentionality.
Dr. Jones, did you want to weigh in on what he said or what Couture said about the statistics and how we change that? How do we show people this would be a win-win when people are holding on to power and worried about giving it up?
Yeah, both and quickly. One, I'm not going to disagree with Gerald Neal because he'll call me later and cuss me out about disagreeing with him in public. So I'm not going to do that. Those are powerful points, good Senator. I agree with you. But Couture brought up another point, and Couture quite often does. She talked about how she was disengaged educationally after a while because she wasn't seeing herself. Probably wasn't seeing herself in front of the classroom, definitely wasn't seeing herself in what she was being taught. And so a very quick point, because I don't want this to get lost, quite often because we live in a capitalist society, no disrespect to my own president, she's a businesswoman, so we get back to the capitalism, but we get in trouble if we fall into economic essentialism, where we think everything is just about the resources. We can get all kinds of resources, and if we keep using them the same way, we're not going to move forward. So educationally, when you talk about white kids, Black kids, and others, right, we have to pay serious attention to curriculum reform from K through 12 as well in higher ed. If we don't pay attention to curriculum reform and stop letting white supremacy bleed into what we're teaching our children, which we've done for a very, very long time, we are going to continue to replicate what we've produced over the years. So curriculum reform is incredibly important. Anybody in the city who's in the state who's listening, if you don't have Black studies at your school, you better create it. If you do have Black studies, you need to shore it up. If you don't have good Latin American studies, create it, shore it up. Native American studies, shore it up. Women's and gender studies, shore it up. You can't claim to be a serious university now without those things, and you need those things to shore up your curriculum. Again, truth before you can have reconciliation.
All right, let's do real fast. Go ahead, Dr. Bendaputi. Then I want our panelists to ask each other questions. I want to get to audience questions. They have had a lot of questions. Weigh in, Dr. Bendaputi.
Think of everything, Couture, when you talked about how you felt alienated as a child, which I can completely understand. And the other point that was so important was as though the story of Black people began with slavery, that there was nothing before, the only thing you hear about. And that is very powerful. There's one program we have, I wish I could tell you, by talking about anti-racism, I have challenged every unit in the on campus to think about how they will contribute to it. And we don't have time, but every unit is thinking about what they would bring to it. One thing I do want to say, because I'm hoping a lot of the people listening might be interested, we also desperately need role models, Black faculty across the curriculum, even in school. So one program that we have with our School of Education that I'm very proud of is, maybe someone listening to it, Senator Neal, you might decide after this that you actually want to go teach in a school. Before, what used to happen is, if you're a professional, but you don't have an undergraduate degree in education, you're not going to go back and spend 4 years. We have a program now, particularly targeting Black professionals, if they're interested, to come to us. 1-year program. It's a master teacher internship. So you'll be paired up with a teacher in JCPS, watch them get intensive mentoring, get your classes, a master's degree, and a guaranteed position inside JCPS. Because these are people in this community who want to make a difference. I could go on, and please don't forget, a big part of why we acquired Jewish Hospital, and Senator Neal knows this, Mayor Fisher knows this, we talked about it extensively. For me, it was that it would have had a disproportionate impact on Black and brown bodies in this community. There's just no question. So I just wanted to put that out, because maybe if people are listening to it, you need to be stepping up, and we are here to support you if you have any interest at all in being a teacher and being a role model. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Dr. Bendaputi. Let's get Ron Jones to come back on camera. He's been gathering up some of our questions, and I want to go ahead and ask, see what questions our audience have had. And then panelists, if you have questions for each other, let's get those. We're going to get to those in just a second. Ron, let's go ahead and start. Give us the first question.
Sure. Okay, now you got a bunch now. This one is for Dr. Nilipu. What initiatives are in place to increase access to STEM, business law, and social work programs for prospective students of color at the University of Louisville?
Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is incredibly important. And this is something that Professor Jones and I have talked about, as have others. It is important for our young children, Black and brown kids, to be able to explore every program that's out there, not feel like they can only go into 1 or 2 areas. Maybe I'll give one specific. One of the things we've done is invest in financial aid advisors, because a lot of the kids think that it's not possible for them, that this is not even a way they can go. So we're investing in support. But for engineering, as one example, our Dean of Engineering has come up with this idea. We use so much of the standardized testing to decide whether you can get into a particular program or not, especially in STEM fields. And ACT and SAT, they're most correlated with your parents' socioeconomic status, whether they can pay money to get you to go into those test preps. So we now have a program. It's an alternative path into engineering. You still have to get your calculus classes done, but you're not automatically left out just because you didn't have those ACT scores. So we are very pleased. We've launched that program. It's really targeting young students of color to get into STEM fields. The same sorts of initiatives in every area. I know I spoke even faster than normal. I hope it made sense, so that you're not making just an arbitrary test score keep you out of a career that you could pursue.
All right, Ron, next question.
Sure. Louisville is continuing red line practices that are unfair and detrimental to African American communities. We see displacement of people in communities without consideration of replacement resources to return. Why does this continue, and how do we address this?
Who'd like to weigh in on that?
And I'll take it.
Mayor?
Yeah, I mean, if there's any evidence of redlining, we want to know about that. That obviously was a historical practice that started back in the 30s, and about 4 years ago, I commissioned Joshua Poe to tell the history of redlining in the community, so that white Louisville could understand, between that and urban renewal, why the city is in the shape that it's in when you walk around and see the built environment. I am more concerned about digital redlining, the inavailability of high-speed broadband to every household in the community. It should be as accessible as water and electricity is, and we're working to make sure that's not an issue. Also, there's a priority we put before the General Assembly about insurance redlining, where folks in low-income, predominantly Black communities face a disproportionate burden on insurance prices that they should. So we've got to relook at all these things, I think, as society if we expect equitable outcomes.
Okay, here's one for Senator Neal. Senator Neal, do you see House Bill 309 having a racist component?
Well, let me say this. House Bill 309 is a bill that was filed a few days ago to address this question ostensibly regarding civilian review boards and whether or not how that was going to be configured. In other words, the real central question was whether or not a civilian review board, one that was actually created by ordinance in the city, whether it's going to have an independent capacity to subpoena to get sufficient information to do its work of oversight and advice, et cetera, and hold officers accountable. 309, however, does not do that. 309 sets up a situation where the Civilian Review Board would have to request from the Government Audit and Oversight Committee that they subpoena those records that police would not provide to them, and that if let's put it this way, if the Civilian Review Board asked for that information and they didn't get it, they stopped. But if the GOA subpoenaed that information and they didn't get it, and they would have to agree to do that, then you'd have to go to circuit court to try to enforce that, to make sure that you can get that information. So it doesn't go all the way. I don't think it's I don't think that resolution puts us outside of getting some positive results from setting up a civilian review board, but it certainly doesn't give a civilian review board the independence that it needs in terms of seeking information and holding people accountable. The last thing is this: I noticed in looking at 309, there's a component in here which is very strange when we talked about this issue. In fact, I'll read it to you. The mayor shall be nominated and elected in nonpartisan elections. Now, that's got to be a partisan move to take a piece like that and embed it in this piece, which is dealing with questions, quite frankly, of police brutality and accountability and that sort of thing. So you got to understand that where I operate, it really is kind of tricky. So something like this could die just on the issue that it's corrupted by that type of language, or it could pass because it's embodied in the type of thing that someone else would join in as well. So I hope it's a complex kind of issue. We're still working on it. It's still in process. And I'm hopeful we can come out with a resolution that's going to be helpful going into the future, particularly as it's related to police accountability.
But in the world that we live in right now, I think it makes it much more difficult for a Black person to be elected mayor of Louisville if we go to nonpartisan races, because of the difficulty of coming out of a Democratic primary and facing off against a Republican. So there's some real concerns about that.
And strangely enough, if I may, Rachel, strangely enough, they want to maintain a Metro Council that's partisan and then have a nonpartisan mayor. This is very targeted. You can tell what this is. So I'm gonna have to get with the sponsor of that bill and see if I can find out what where this all comes from. But I pretty much know, but we'll see.
More to come on that, I am sure. All right, Ron, next question.
Sure. This is a question for Lamont Collins. It says, are there any policies and/or direct resources focused on supporting Roots 101 in becoming an educational and racial healing space? Are strategic partnerships being developed with the University of Louisville, the Mayor's Office, and philanthropists?
Good question. I'll give you the best answer. We are working with JCPS as we speak. I work with the Justice Now school that they have. Want to reach out. I've been working with Dr. McCormick. I'm trying to develop something with U of L slowly, but I hopefully get to there because that is my alma mater. And it's the right thing to do, right? So as far as the mayor is concerned, we have gotten a relationship by phone. I trust his judgment. I trust what he's telling me. I trust that he says that he understands what Roots 101 is all about. And he's proud of what we've accomplished and what we're still trying to accomplish. But if we have gotten physical dollars, no, we have not. For what we've accomplished on a national basis, and I think Rachel will attest to this, we've probably gotten more national attention than national museums over the last a year and a half we've been here. So, but the answer, no, we have not got budget. Do I think we deserve to be in some budgets? Do we deserve to be looked at from a state level, a local level? Indeed, we are trying to work on programs to make that happen. But until this point, it has not happened. And we're going to continue to try to do that. We always open our board up and bring more people on our board that can help expand that footprint for us. But that's what we need. We need to be on someone's budget, but we have not been able to do that yet.
Anybody else want to weigh in on that? Okay, Ron, next question. And I
Yes.
think, and you're right, Lamont, the attention that you all have gotten has just been unparalleled. It really has. And I think everybody agrees that we're going to be better if you're around. And I think that hopefully that is something that we're all looking at. All right, Ron?
Yes. Question. This says, why haven't we changed the political climate and have more diversity in city and state government? How can this be accomplished? And what are the ramifications of why it has not been?
I'll jump in. I mean, I think that that's a very complex issue and not just a one simple question to that. I am someone, as I spoke before about not being engaged in history, I was not someone as a Black young Kentuckian engaged in the electoral process. But I think that that is simply due because of what white supremacy has done and showed us throughout the years, and also just the lack of education. And so I think that it's going to take a lot. It's going to take folks getting into community and engaging people, educating people, and also then when there are opportunities for people to be on appointed positions from the mayor's office or higher positions, that there is representation, and representation that is actually from the community, people who know and understand the issues, who've come from the issues. And so I don't know, that's a real complex. It's complex. I think it's a lot of different things, and you know, I think that what we've seen this past year in 2020, I think that we will see a shift in that. I think that you'll see more young people engaged in a different type of way. But I think that the way our system and our cities and our state has been set up, it's been set up intentionally to keep people out who look like me and who look like Dr. Jones and who look like Lamont Collins. And so, I mean, I'm hopeful that it's going to change. I know that a lot of us is doing some deep work in communities. But yeah, I'll just say that's a complex issue and pass it off to Dr. Jones.
You pick up the ball, Dr. Jones.
Yeah, Dr. Jones.
Look, I don't think this one is complex at all. Kentucky, the reason there is as much diversity as we'd like is Kentucky is a very white, very conservative state that has racial issues that run much deeper than the majority of the population wants to admit. If they stay on the path that they're on, this is going to be a state that is going to go on the DNV list. Do not visit. So the state needs to take an account of whether it wants to be a state that is rooted in early 20th or even 19th century sensibilities, or one that's going to move into the 21st century. So again, why don't we have more diversity? A very white, very conservative state that has yet to really deal with how deep racism runs in it.
Aha, there it is. That structural piece I was talking about. And the fact of the matter is that I think it is a pretty simple proposition. I think he framed it very well. The reality is that if you want change, it has to start from the top. Now, it may get generated from the bottom by protests and other things, but when you're talking about policy, when you're talking about the direction of an institution or something of this nature, it has to come from the top. They have to be intentional. I love that word. They have to be intentional. This is a priority. I tell you what, I'll give you a good example of it right here. Dr. Neely Vendapudi. That's an example. At the top, prioritize that and begin to work through, imperfectly, I'm sure, but certainly stirring the pot, moving the options, bringing people to rethinking their positions, changing the dynamics in the matrix brings about results in order to exploit those things that you have to exploit to make that change. So I'm telling you, it starts from the top. You have to be intentional about it. This thing is structural and it's deep. And Dr. Jones, thank you so much for reaffirming the fact that we have deep racial problems that run right straight up and down through our institutions.
Well, I think the context of
reaffirmation, but okay.
okay, yeah,
Go ahead, Mayor.
record that, Ricky. The you got to be aware of the context as well. So, you know, when LBJ signed some of the civil rights legislation, you know, he said we lost the South. Okay. And so you had the Southern states become the Republican states. Now what we're seeing is you've got the growth South states, Georgia, North Carolina. You've got stagnant South states like we are. And then you've got shrinking Southern states, Alabama, Mississippi, et cetera. So the point is the general demographic and political outlook of our country changes. Those growth states, Southern states, are the ones we are going to be losing to. And you can see that taking place right now when you look at economic competitiveness of Southern states. So we cannot be blind to those issues. So you've got racism as a moral issue, but then you've got it as an economic issue as well that we have got to be aware of about what's taking place around us. And that requires opening your eye. Kentucky is 8% Black. So you have a lot of the legislature that just doesn't interface with Black people or gay people. So they therefore think they are the other versus it's us together. And that ultimately is the strength of our country at the end. So we've got to become a more diverse state to be more competitive.
There it is again, the structural piece. Okay,
All right.
good.
Ron, let's do one more question from the audience, and then I don't want to keep anybody over too much because you've been so generous with your time. Give us a good one, Ron, to finish this up with the questions from the audience.
Okay, this is one for Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones, you mentioned class. Are you saying that class is as toxic as race? How so? And does this start in school?
No, I don't separate them out. People often try to separate out class and race. I think they are inextricably linked. You know, we saw statistics where Black people are disproportionately poor. And this is something that we see from the cradle to the grave. You know, poverty disproportionately affects Black people across the board. But so race, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can deal with race and class at the same time. So if you're Black, you stand a greater chance of being poor and suffering the afflictions that come along with both of those things. So, you know, people are quite often more comfortable talking about class than they are race. They're more comfortable talking about economics than they are race. There's still people who will make the argument that the Civil War wasn't about slavery, right? It was about economics. You're damn right. Slavery was an economic system. So, you know, you got to put those things together. So I don't tease those out in that way. You know, the question is, why are Black people disproportionately poor and affected by the ills that come along with that? So no, I don't separate those in that way.
All right, quick
Rachel, may
question.
I add something on that?
Please, Dr. Vendapudi, go ahead.
That is so true. Race and class are really, really interlinked, and the intersections are very fascinating because you put up a lot of statistics, but the net wealth of a Black family is 1/10 that of a white family. So it's not a 50%, it's not 25%, it's 1/10. So it's impossible to draw any other conclusion except, unfortunately, till we change things, the color of your skin is actually impacting what class you will belong to as well. Sorry, I just
No,
that's another statistic.
I want
that
you all to feel comfortable with jumping in. That's what I want. Let me ask one other thing before we move. I want to get final comments from each of you on something. Do any of our panelists have a question of each other while we have this opportunity?
Yeah, I do real quick. I think this show would be complete without us talking about the importance of HBCUs. And of course, we want U of L to be successful, Spalding to be successful, Jefferson as well. But we want Simmons College to be successful. So I just would like to ask Dr. Vendapudi how she sees the role of HBCUs, and Dr. Jones, perhaps I'm sure you've got an opinion on it as well.
I think you put it so well. Vice President Kamala Harris, if you wanted to know, is a great example of what happens with HBCUs. We have a lot to learn. I completely agree. Tomorrow, I'm very proud to say that Dr. Beverly Tatum, many of you would know, Why Do the Black Kids Sit in the Cafeteria by Themselves? I forget the title, but it was one of the books that shook me when I first read it. President of Spelman, former president of Spelman College, is speaking to us. So I do think it's really important that there's a place for all of these universities and colleges to succeed. And certainly Simmons, I could not agree more.
Can I piggyback on that, Rachel?
Sure. And then Dr. Jones, or I didn't know if you had anything else. Go ahead, Lamont, you
Can I
start.
piggyback on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, the mayor made a point about really progressive South, Atlanta, places, North Carolina, and all those places traditionally have HBCUs there. So you have people of color that's getting that education and the importance of our culture being excellent and excellent in what we do. And that's what we're trying to do at Roots 101. We're showing that excellence of where we came from and where we're going. And that confirms that when Louisville understands the importance of our kids understanding who they are and what they are, it makes Louisville progress into a better culture and a better city. And I just wanted to throw that in there.
I so agree. But one other thing, it's a point of pride because it's Ricky Jones, it's Blaine Hudson, it's so many people who've done this. I do want you to know, Mr. Mayor, that in the entire country, there are only 2 universities among the public universities, highly selective public universities, only 2 that have more than 10% Black students. And your University of Louisville is one of them. And the other one is SUNY Albany. So we are, and also we just got recognized. It doesn't mean we're done. We have so many faults, so much more to go. But HBCUs play a very important part with the number of students we serve at UFL. Lamont Collins being an alum of ours. So we cannot forget that we all have to work together, and it's deeply significant. And yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Dr. Bendapudi. I'm sorry.
I'm done.
I did not mean to upcut you. I promise you that.
Oh, no.
All right.
Rachel, HBCUs are incredibly important. Being a Morehouse man, a graduate of the greatest HBCU, sadness Martin Luther King Jr. at some point in my life. And the Pootie's chief of staff, Michael Wade Smith, is always wondering why I don't wear U of L gear, but I always have a Morehouse pin on and Morehouse shirts. So, but what the University of Louisville has done when you talk about HBCUs, they created a Pan-African Studies Department, which in effect is a little HBCU sitting at a PWI. And so we're trying to replicate that right now at U of L's campus and doing it in I think, a really, really powerful way.
That was in the chat feature. Somebody said that and seconded that.
True.
Shout out to HBCUs.
All right. Now, so the question is we're going to answer with, if we don't hold up the mirror now, will we ever? And how will history remember this moment? A final weigh-in from each of our panelists. And if you could keep it about 30 seconds with your thoughts on that. If we don't hold up the mirror now, will we ever? And are we going to do it? Keturah, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it is that we as individuals have to take responsibility in how we are either complicit to what is happening or how we are being very intentional and at the front lines of tearing down white supremacy. And not only is it up to us as individuals, but also to put pressure on the people we are closest to in those systems to make sure that we are being very, very intentional about tearing down white supremacy. And at the end of the day, that's all it's about. If we're not talking about tearing down white supremacy, then what are we talking about?
Senator Neal.
Well, I think it's going to be a tricky bag. I think we will go forward and we will make progress. And I think there are people of goodwill that increasingly recognize that these things are to their interests as well. But I think we're going to get inevitably the pushback that we need to be prepared for and to fight the battle. I see it as a continuum. I see it as a progression of history. And I think what you do is you fight that fight and you do what you have to do to get to those things called justice, fairness, and equality.
Dr. Bendapudi.
I am hopeful and I'm also worried. Even as an optimistic person, it has to be not for the moment. It cannot be performative. It cannot be just now. We have to realize this is not going to happen overnight, but that if we don't do something now, this is our civil rights movement. It really is. And in 30 years, 25 years, we look back And I think we'd all like to think we would have marched, we would have been arrested, we would have done all of those things. For me, my commitment is for higher education, that everything we can do, we will. And so we have to make change where we are. And we have to change individually, and we have to change the systems that within which we operate.
Dr. Jones.
This is not the end of history. And, you know, no matter what happens this year or the next half decade or the next decade, it's not the end of history. And when you understand history, you understand that this country on race is filled with, you know, starts and stops, forward movement and setbacks. Civil War ends, you get Reconstruction, but then you get the Hayes-Tilden Compromise. Black men are given the right to vote in 1870, but then you get grandfather clauses, poll taxes, you know, outright violence. You know, so there's always fits, and you get Barack Obama, then you get Donald Trump. So there's always pushback, and there will be pushback again. So my advice to everybody is to stay vigilant, educate yourself as much as you can, steel yourself, ally yourself with people who are like-minded and humane, and be ready for the next battle, because it will come. So don't think that, you know, this is the end of history, whether it be positive or negative. You know, we'll move forward, we'll move back, and then we fight some more. That's the way this has always gone.
Mayor Fisher.
I'm optimistic. First, and there's two things. One is a ground up. So when we think about ground up, that means we as individuals, especially folks that look like me, have got to change. We have to reform locally, let's say like police reform. But then it has to be top down. So at the federal level, the changes that we spoke about there can have massive instant change throughout the country for those states that are resistant to change. And the reason why I'm optimistic is the demographics of the country are changing. So if we look out 20, 50 years, we're going to look very different as the United States of America. The people we're going to elect are going to have different viewpoints as well that ultimately will mirror what our country looks like.
And Lamont.
Well, I think Katori hit it right on point. The mirror is the image, and the mayor hit a point. The mirror is changing. The Leave the Beaver family we knew 60 years ago is not the family we see today. So as we learn to educate each other and learn to love each other, or try to love each other, when we understand that first we break down supremacy, because we break down supremacy. If we tell you that we were the bulldozers for bulldozers, jackhammers for jackhammers, and the engineering for engineering degrees, where is the basis of supremacy? So we can show that people of color contribute to America, and we can see the change of America in a mirror, then America will change. So that's my optimistic point of view on that.
And I want to let you all know too, for our audience who's watching, everybody on this panel has weighed in with some resources that we're going to share with people via a link tomorrow or via an email with books that they've suggested, articles and things like that. Dr. Jones gave us a whole starter pack. So we thank you for that. So we've got plenty of resources coming your way. I just want to thank all of you all for joining us tonight. I can't thank you enough. The Courier-Journal ended their editorial with this: we know what to do to make our city great, and collectively we have the resources. But it ended with the question, now Louisville, you must answer, do we have the will to do it? And I guess that's the decision we all need to make as a city collective, as a state, and each individual in what we will be doing to move the needle forward on that. We hope tonight at least made you think, has you looking for ways to make an impact, and looking inside to reflect on your own biases and what you can do to be anti-racist. I want to let you know our Let's Talk Bridging the Divide series is about tackling tough topics, looking for common ground and trying to move the needle forward. I thank our panelists tonight for helping to do that. I really appreciate it. We also want to thank our sponsor, Fifth Third Bank, and our community partners, Lean Into Louisville and 104.7 FM WLOU and 1240 AM WLLV. Thank you to our audience for joining us tonight. We talk about histories that are being taught. Our next program will be Kentucky Hidden History, some Kentuckians you perhaps haven't heard of, but those you should know their stories. It is February 23rd from 6 to 7 p.m. The wonderful Ed Hamilton is a panelist on that. So again, as we conclude, we've talked about empowerment, we've talked about imbalance that we've seen, and certainly faces needing to change at the table. Anybody else have anything else they want to add in? Because you're going to end it more eloquently than I am, I'm sure. Anybody?
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you all for being part of this conversation.
this is our moment for the city, so let's seize it.
Thank you all.
I'd like to thank you also, Rachel, and I'd also like to say that the Kentucky Legislative Black Caucus will be featuring this Black History Celebration. It will premiere virtually on the 16th of this month. I invite your audience and all of you all to view it. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And again, to our audience, thank you, and our panelists, sincere appreciation. Thank you all.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.